Hi, everyone. This is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Life, the podcast that talks about everything that's happening in the city of Peachtree Corners and shares the stories that are out there of people that are working in this community, playing in this community, living here. Sometimes we also do podcasts as follow up to articles in our magazine, Peachtree Corners Magazine. Tonight is one such podcast. We have a story in this latest issue about a young woman. I'll call her a young woman because young at heart, right? Um, she's with us. Her and her husband. They're going to share a story and a journey that I think is important for everyone to know, because of how it came about and because of what she's going through. It's interesting in a time of social distancing, though, in a way of life that we've all become accustomed to, right? Because of the pandemic, because we're afraid of catching coronavirus 19. We're washing our hands, we're doing social distancing, we're facing these challenges, and yet among our lives, among other people, there are other challenges that within the midst of that, other challenges are coming up that they have to face. Complicated in this world, but it is such that the world doesn't stop, right? It just keeps going and things will happen as they do. Um, but good story here and a good message that you should all take from this. So let me introduce Debbie Mason and Mike Mason. Let me bring them on. They are with me tonight to talk essentially about the journey that started in November 2020 or November, October. So Debbie, why don't you bring us through a little bit about what is going on and how had this started, and tell us about it.
Well, it was a very innocent happening. Mike and I were helping a local political candidate run for re-election, and we were working in her campaign. And I simply called and asked a neighbor if we could put a sign in his yard. And he said, "Oh, sure, put a sign in our yard. We love that person, and but don't hang up, Debbie. I want to talk to you about something else." And I said, "Well, what is it?" He went on to say, "Well, did you know that my mother recently passed from ovarian cancer?" I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't know that." And he said, "Well, on her deathbed, I made a promise to her. And she made me promise every woman I talked to I would tell her to get a CA 125 test." Now that's just a blood test. I said, no, Rico, I've never heard of that test. And it was Richard Munoz, a nearby neighbor. So, and I said, "Well, tell me about it." He said, "Well, it's just a blood test. I mean, you can get it anytime, maybe $25, $50. But you can add it in with your blood work when you're having a physical." And I was due for one. And so I went in several months later and I asked the doctor to add a CA 125 test to that. And when I got the results back, it was slightly elevated. Well, it concerned me. I was a little scared. But the doctor said, "Don't worry about it. That test can be high for a number of reasons. But if you're really worried, we can get a scan. And since you're an older woman, that would probably be wise." So we took the next step, and I had a scan of my abdomen, and they found what they called a thickening in my uterine wall. And he said, "Well, I'm not really worried about that, but it's out of my hands now. You need to go to your gynecologist and have him check it out." So went to my gynecologist, had him check it out, and he said, "Debbie, I don't think that is a thickening. I believe it's a polyp." But I said, "Do I have anything to worry about?" And he said, "No, no, no. We see these all the time. It's just we'll do a DNC where they scrape the inside of the uterus and get rid of it. And but we'll go ahead and take your fallopian tubes and ovaries because you're past childbearing age, and then you won't have to worry with the CA-125 test anymore. I said, well, that sounds good. So we scheduled it. It was scheduled very soon, right before Thanksgiving of 2020. So we were about to go out to dinner. Several days later, I recovered nicely to celebrate my, my good health. When the phone rang, and it was Dr. Mordell, and he said, Debbie, I'm sorry to have to tell you, I have devastating news. The polyp was cancer.
What did you think about at that moment?
I couldn't breathe. It's just, when I think about it, nobody wants to hear that. So he went on. It got worse. He said, it's carcinosarcoma. Well, I had never heard of that. And he said it's the worst diagnosis any woman wants to hear. He told me the kind of cancer it was, and we talked shortly, and then we hung up. And so, needless to say, we called my son and said, cancel dinner. They came over. We cried. But, like we always do, Rico, in anything that we tackle, what's the next step? And, we were going in, it was the week before Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. We said, okay, now who do we know? What can we do? Our minds started churning. And Mike might want to come in here because, right.
Well, what you do is you always go with the facts. And so I immediately, after supporting Debbie and everything, got through that. I said, look, before we get too far into this, let's get the facts. So I immediately, because she was told you need to get a surgeon immediately, a gynecologist who's also a surgeon. And I recommend this person. Now it'll be hard to get that guy because he's Thanksgiving holidays. And so we started calling people to how quickly can we get in to see him? How quickly can Debbie have the surgery? But in the meantime, you go to Google and you figure out everything you need to know about carcinosarcoma. Yes. And it's terrible. It's exactly what the doctor said.
Everything that you hear is gloom and doom because this cancer is always found late stage.
Late third or fourth.
Right.
You don't see symptoms until late.
Yeah.
When we had that conversation some weeks ago, you and I thought this would be great to share in the magazine and on the podcast. Yeah. I went and I looked, the same thing you did probably, WebMD, you look at all the stuff that's out there, what type of cancer is it? And you're right. I mean, it's scary. And it's just like, even if you're not a religious person, yeah. I think you find that the world sometimes brings things to you, presents themselves to you in a way, opportunities present themselves to you. I mean, you walked up to that guy's door and you found salvation to a degree, yeah. Because you found it early.
Yeah.
So once you went through that, once you got past the shock, I'm sure, and the emotion and the supporting, and we all, I think husbands to some degree want to be problem solvers, right? We want to be able to be that supporter, but we want to solve also the problem. So how did it go? Where did you take it from there then? Because it was before Thanksgiving, so how'd that go?
Well, we had, first of all, we called our family doctor who had found through a scan the polyp. And because the doctor we had contacted, the surgeon who we weren't able to get in to see until after Thanksgiving, said to have a chest X-ray or a scan of our chest.
Right.
Well, I said to Dr. Single when we had occasion to talk to him, can you order that? And he said, yes, we'll get that right away. Went over and got that done. But I think we mentioned to Dr. Single in him getting the results, saying that because this cancer would typically move to the lungs is a popular place it likes to go. That scan did not show any evidence of metastasis as we read the results.
Excellent.
And so and we asked Dr. Single, I said, well, we just had the other scan. He said, well, that should help too. And so, so between those two things, for the first time, I felt a little bit better. Well, Mike, is on the Board of Health with being the mayor of the largest city. So he's friends with Audrey Arona, who is the chairman of the Board of Health. And she just so happens to be a gynecologist before she was on the Board of Health. So we're grasping for information, and we can't find professionals fast enough. So we called her and ran that past her, and we told her the story. She said, "What? You mean how you found this?"
She
cancer?
said you aren't having any symptoms?
I mean, this cancer is always found because a woman is bleeding. And that's usually stage 3 or stage 4. Debbie, that neighbor of yours probably saved your life. Well, that is yet to be seen, but she's right. And so, because I was thinking, let's get my affairs in order, Mike. I mean, I'm going to die. Well, we all know we're going to die, but I wanted to think I would have a little more time on this earth. But I thought I would have to get my affairs in order. She said, Debbie, this is survivable. And that was a second ray of hope that I got. So then when we finally got in to see the surgeon, he was more gloom and doom, because he says that cancer is just a monster. It's known for coming back. Let's just get it out as quickly as we can. So we got it out a few days before Christmas. It took me almost a month to get a schedule. Some people love to do surgeries at the end of the year for insurance purposes. I understand.
Right.
And,
sure.
So we said, whatever hospital, I don't care if we have to, where we have to go, first available. So we had it taken, and that they took out my entire uterus because he had to determine if it had passed through the wall. And that's how we were able to stage the cancer. And then he called me. But of course, he told me the good news in the hospital. I had a little setback. I was home recovering well. And I started bleeding, and it just wouldn't stop. And so they rushed me to the hospital, and I have heart issues as well. And I was taking a blood thinner, and that was complicating the situation. Sure. So they got the bleeding to stop, and everything was fine. But I remember him coming into my room. He said, Debbie, stage 1. You're lucky. Stage 1. And he held up his finger like that. And I said, oh, my God. I cried and cried. But he said, I'm going to still present your case to the tumor board at the hospital, and they'll tell us what they want you to do. Mm-hmm. So he did. He presented it, and they suggested, since the cancer had progressed through 60% of the wall of the uterus, they don't like to see more than 50%. 50%, they'll only recommend radiation.
Mhm.
Since it was a little more, they said for the best outcome for this woman, let's do chemo and radiation. And I thought, if that's what we got to do, let's do it. So I scheduled chemo for the next week. Went in, did a full round of chemo,
Mhm.
and went a week later for my blood work. And they looked at me. I was awfully tired, but I assumed that was from the chemo.
Mhm.
They looked at me and said, "My goodness, when when did this start?" And I said, "When did what start? What do you mean?" They said, "Well, you're terribly jaundiced, Debbie." And so the doctor came in and said, "Oh my goodness, let's put her in a wheelchair and take her downstairs to the hospital." We were over at Duluth North Side,
Right.
and I had gone into a rare reaction to the chemo. 1% of the population experiences this, and I was in liver shutdown. And so the doctor pulled the chair into my room, and I said, "This doesn't look good. If you're going to come in and sit down," because, doctors just don't usually do that. And he said, "Yes, it is. Um, you can live it with cancer, but you can't live without a liver." And they even talked to liver specialists at Emory about the possibility of a transplant. But then the guy we contacted, Dr. Lord, who's wonderful, came into my room and said, "Who said anything to you about liver failure? You're not in liver failure. The liver is a wonderful organ that bounces back. What I suspect will happen, I don't know for sure, but what I suspect will happen, your liver values will rise. It'll take a day or two for us to see." So
Mhm.
the next day, they came up slightly, and the day after that, they came up even more. And and so they let me go home, because there's nothing that you can do to improve your liver. It just does. It just reacts
Right.
on its
So.
own. So it took about a month for my liver values to get back to normal.
Mhm.
So I survived that. I dodged that bullet.
Right.
Uh, and
And they ended up stopping the chemo as
yes, they
well.
said, "No more chemo for you." It's like Jerry
Right.
Seinfeld with the suit Nazi. No more chemo for you.
Right.
So,
Right.
the only thing I can battle this cancer with is radiation. So, uh, once I recovered enough, I started on my uh, journey with radiation, and I had 3 rounds of high dose
Mhm.
radiation, which I can't say I really suffered any side effects from that. A little bit
Right.
of tiredness,
Mhm.
but I was lucky. I thought, well, yeah, I was due. I was overdue for some luck. So, um,
That's right. That's right. Most people have, depending where the radiation's done, most people end up with side effects and stuff.
yeah,
But you've obviously were able to bounce back,
yeah.
and going through that chemo, the radiation, the 3 rounds of radiation. When was the last round that you had?
Well, it was probably the end of February.
I was going to say
Wow.
sometime in March, but same time
May
frame.
Right.
have, may have been the first week
Right.
of March.
Right. Right. So, well, listen, Debbie, you've gone through a lot, back and forth, complications, liver. I mean, it's just like it almost felt like it probably, not knowing how it exactly feel. I certainly know how bad luck feels sometimes,
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
might feel like, darn, I don't win the lottery, and I'm doing this. What's going on, right? You know.
Uh-huh.
Um,
You're right.
and and you're fortunate you have you have a lot of people so for those people that obviously I think people know Mike Mason's the mayor. I think most people know you're the first lady, that you're on founder and on the board of the Peachtree Corners Festival. You were part of the United Peachtree Corners Civic Association. You're still on the board now. I've known you guys going back,
Yeah.
I don't know, 20 odd years maybe. I don't know. It's
Yeah,
been a
probably 20,
long
25
time.
years.
When you first moved
Yeah,
here.
that's right. I moved here in 95, met Tom Rice actually knocking on my door the first campaign. I was like, "Who are you?" And he was like, "I'm Tom Rice. I'm running for office." Um, a former assemblyman, for those that don't know. But yeah, it's been a long time now. And I don't know your personal lives per se, but I've seen your kids grow up a little bit and stuff. But you've had a whole city, lots of friends, I think. What type of support? I mean, you must have had a tremendous amount of support from people that you knew.
I clearly felt the love. My youngest son, who doesn't live here, came all the way down from Connecticut, and he came in right before Christmas, and he stayed through surgery, and he didn't stay through the radiation, but he stayed there through most of the tough parts. Um, and just countless people with food, with sending gift cards, and the stack of cards I got, and all people saying, "I'm praying for you." And I've been told that I have a whole city of people praying for me, and I felt that prayer. I actually could feel it. So it humbles you, because usually I'm on the other end of the giving.
Right.
In all my years of doing all that I do, uh, I'm usually the one doing for people.
You've been a fundraiser. You've been out there for a lot of different charities, working on foundations. You've worked on the Norcross High School Foundation of Excellence. Actually, you guys were, I think, entered into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Um, right? I mean, you've been out there doing things. Um, and so when something like this happens and you're on the other end of that, receiving, um, and obviously the big C word that people worry about. Thank God you seem to be heading in the right direction, right? Um, do priorities change? What has been probably the biggest change in your life? You know?
Well, you look at life differently. I'll
Mm,
say that you don't think long term. You think short term. I used to, Mike and I always say, we give ourselves away. It's something that we need to do for the community, but we might forego something that we wanted to do. Uh, I don't do that anymore. Uh, and I told my uh, partner in crime for the festival just the other day,
mm,
I don't, I still love the festival. It's my baby. I birthed it.
right.
But I just don't feel the burn to raise the money like I used to. I used to treat it like it was buried treasure. I mean, if there's $1 out there, I got to find it. Uh, and I just don't
I'm sure.
feel that anymore. Uh, and I've dropped off of. I used to be on Gwinnett Clean and Beautiful board, and I'm still active in my neighborhood. But I've just slowed down. I take more time for me. I
Yeah,
still make it a point that I attend every city council meeting and work session. I think probably since the city's been in since its
Existence.
existence, I missed one meeting when I had heart surgery, and I missed one meeting. I
Pesky cancer. Right.
well, yeah,
yes, I would think, right? Do you find I mean, I know you have a beautiful garden. We had a photographer go out and take
yeah.
pictures, and I can't tell you it was hard to pick out the right picture for that spread in the magazine. So there was a lot of great pictures in there. Do you find yourself spending more time there? What do you find yourself
Yes.
doing?
I
Movies,
mean, our
reading?
garden has never
You
looked
know?
more beautiful because we got started early this year.
Yeah, she did a great job.
Because of COVID-19. COVID's been good to us because we've sidestepped the disease, and it's given us more time at home to plant. Because when I'm in that backyard, I'm in the zone. My hands are in the dirt, and everything that Mike says I paint with flowers. But
she does.
Cool. I like that.
Yes, you're right. I had changed my priorities there. We love our yard. We enjoyed a staycation before it was popular to staycation.
I'm sure.
So because we're not big travelers, we're homebodies, and we just love our home and we love our backyard. So
did Mike, you as a husband, as mayor of the city, as a friend, and husbands are sometimes deep friends with their wives, right? You hope that's the case. How did that compare? I mean, where, how did you feel? What were you? Did you feel that tell me a little bit about how that felt? I mean, man to man here. I mean,
you probably know this about me, and a lot of people do. I'm very objectives oriented, and I just make a list and work the list. And so, and I was an accountant, a chief financial officer for years and years, tried to get the irrefutable facts. And so that's what I started doing with, it's a jokingly like to say, I wish I had the luxury of having feelings, but it's helpful if you try to avoid having feelings. You can't. It's your wife, been married 48 years. And your best friend. But you also play the role. So one role is I'm the guy who's got to get all the facts and make sure that when we talk to doctors, I'm there, and COVID got in the way, and Debbie would Zoom me in, or FaceTime me in.
He was not allowed in the room when I saw these doctors. And like I said, it's like drinking out of a fire hose. That information is coming. And when I would leave the room, I couldn't remember anything they told me. It was just overwhelming.
And I would be able to communicate because I had already read everything that's possible to read. And I knew, and I'd already figured out stage 1 is this and stage 2 is that. What about this? And so I was ready. And so we went through that, and I would help her. I would provide structure. To her, okay, no, here's the priorities. Here's what we're going to do. We're talking to the doctor, and this is it. Make sure things. I would call doctors and schedule things for her so that she didn't have to deal with a lot of that stuff because you don't have a lot of bandwidth left.
Yeah.
That was the thing. Knowing Debbie, that it was emotionally draining to deal with it. So she was dealing with something that would drain away. And if you're dealing with the bureaucracy of a doctor's office or a hospital, that can kind of drain you too. So I would handle all that. And then when we would get setback news, or it would be like, oh no, what does that mean? My job is always to be the chief cheerleader.
Yeah.
Like, no, that is not what's going to happen. You have to focus on this. You have to wait and get this fact. All we've heard is this. That does not mean that. And you have to be very clear on expectations and relentlessly, shamelessly cheerlead. And that's
even when I'm sure that Debbie would be like, I don't need the cheerleading. This is the way I'm feeling right now. I'm just going to have to go with it because. I can imagine. I have a wife that I'm at the doctor's with her sometimes like that because it's not only listening to the stuff. She's very good about remembering everything. She remembers everything. But you want to be there to handle perspective also, right? Like you said, like it doesn't mean this because you're only listening from a certain point of view because that's where you are. You're afraid of what's going on, and you just it's a tunnel vision almost. And you need that extra person there with you. That you trust to be able to bring you back a little bit. I mean, did you
to ask questions?
Good old FaceTime.
Yeah, to literally ask questions about Now, wait a minute. Let's be clear. What about this? What about that? Because when you're in the moment with a doctor, they give you time, but remember that they're trying to get to the next patient as well. So you want to get all the facts clarified before.
And when they're a cancer doctor, guess what? The next patient has cancer too.
Yeah.
So everybody is they want to have their time, and they should have their time. So
did COVID? I know COVID obviously ranked in there somewhere, obviously because of the way the hospitals were working, at least the beginning of the year. Did that even bother you at that? Was that a concern?
I was scared to death. Let's see. COVID started in around February of 2020.
No, 2019.
19, and then I got the diagnosis of my cancer in
by
October
20.
And then lost my train of thought.
It was still there. It was still going on.
It was still there, and we had to. You had to mask up. No doctors always would let anybody else in the room, and the last place you ever wanted to be was in a hospital. And I was in a hospital for 2 surgeries, and then for for nearly my liver failure and my bleeding episode. So how we managed to, and still I thank God that we have sidestepped getting COVID-19 so far, and I'm worried about this Delta variant. Oh my goodness.
Right. So you guys masking up still now when you go out if it's too crowded?
We started again.
It depends. When I go to the grocery store, if it seems especially crowded, we mask up. And in restaurants, are our favorite restaurant that we go to. But for most places, this morning I was at the nail salon. We were the only 2 people in there. We didn't. So, we just use our judgment.
I get it. And you're right. I mean, I just started masking up a couple of days ago because of the variant and stuff. And I also found out one of my tennis, not partner, but he was on the Alta team I'm on, has COVID, just got it, even though he's fully vaccinated. So there you go. And there are more people like that, it seems. I've been speaking to a few doctors, and they're seeing more of that even though you're fully vaccinated, there's still people catching it, it seems.
Yeah.
So you want to be careful out there, and you've adjusted your lifestyle a bit. You've set your priorities. I'm sure moving forward as things progress, God willing, everything stays better. I know you're still concerned. You have another test coming up in a week or so.
Yeah, Mike in his cheerleading fashion, when we got the word that the first scan that I received, there was no sign of metastases. So it was clear. Naturally, I cried in the office, and they told us how it works. You won't have another scan unless you have symptoms. So anyway, when we got the number of the CA-125 test back, and that number had elevated, I said, oh no, it's probably just like Dr. Selmary said, it's back. And then Mike in his cheerleading fashion said, no, Debbie, remember, let's look at the facts. He reels me back in when I need it. And thank God I've got him. I don't know how I got so lucky, but we're gonna go next Wednesday to have that CA-125 test redone and see if it has jumped again. So we'll know then if it has jumped again. There will probably be something going on, but if it is stabilized, because that number can go up or down, it's not a finite number like most blood tests. It can bounce around for various. It measures inflammation, and so inflammation can be from whatever. you know.
Yeah, a variety of reasons, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So what? We're I think we're at a good point. Um, I appreciate you sharing your time with us, with everyone to talk about this. Obviously, CA 125 is the test that every woman should take. Um, and it's like you said, it's inexpensive. It could be part of your physical, your lab work.
Obviously, the CA obviously stands for cancer, but it measures inflammation, as Debbie said. So there are a lot of false positives. I mean, young women, particularly, if a woman starts her period, it's going to skyrocket. But it can register all kinds of things. That's why doctors say they don't do it routinely with women over a certain age. But but we have gone through this with other doctors.
I can remember the
Right.
oncologist, the surgeon
Fussing
telling me. He said, "Now I don't want you going out and telling every woman you meet, because he knew the story, to get a CA 125 test. It's just going to cost them money and it's going to scare them to death." I said, "Well, yeah, I was scared to death too, but what if they're like me, Dr. Samiri?" And he
Right.
said, "Well, yes, in your case, it may have saved your life." So
settle right there.
and that's the end of the story.
Right.
Give me false positives, I'll take them all day long. If I peel that onion and it
Right.
comes back no cancer. So
It's like I think at one point mammography was like that, right? They were trying to say, let's cut it out because you don't need it,
yeah.
at a certain point. And it's like every life is important. Yes, you want to be able to have that option to be
Exactly.
if you want that option, you should be able to have it. There's no reason.
I would like to think that every woman, by the time she maybe is age 40, would be a good time to start. I'm quite sure there's women somewhere that have gotten this cancer younger than that. But I think, to be reasonable, 40 would be a good age. But most certainly, I mean, I was a 70-year-old woman. I still had my uterus. A lot of women don't.
Right.
And I went for genetic testing to see if I had a marker somewhere that a BRCA gene was why I got my cancer. And they were all negative. And the genetic lady told me, the reason you got cancer, Debbie, was just because you had a uterus.
Yeah, she didn't inherit it from anybody.
So.
Wow. Okay. Well, guys, appreciate your time with us. I know we were talking before about how Debbie's from Indiana, Mike's from Georgia, native. Just to give some people some background. Although, when did you leave Indiana, Debbie? Did you come straight to Georgia, or did you come through by way of somewhere else?
How long do you have?
Really?
That story is so long, Rico. I don't know if you really want to know the answer.
Well, that's for another podcast then. But
Yes, another podcast.
it's good to have you on, and I appreciate you sharing your story. It's a touching story. And Mike and Debbie, I just like
I thank you for letting us have the time with you to share the story, because if this saves one person's life, it will be worth it.
For sure.
I'll take this opportunity. It's like I constantly, relentlessly get vaccinated.
Oh.
Same thing. Get a CA 125. I do it all the time with people, and I mean it. And some people get mad at me. I'm sorry, not really, but be vaccinated. And women over a certain age really are. Talk to your doctor about it. But CA 125 might save your life.
Sure. Thank you, guys. Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. And thanks, everyone, for listening. Pick up the magazine. You'll find it at most businesses, and catch the show later.